Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz, and along with me, as always, is my esteemed colleague, partner in goodness and godliness, Dr. Joe Hamlett. How you
What's
doing,
going
Joe?
on, Dr. Dave?
What's going on, Joe? I don't want to say partner in crime because we're not criminals. Uh,
Right.
yeah, so
As far as everybody knows.
right. So we'd like to welcome all of our viewers and listeners to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, your personal, professional, and career development podcast. If this is your first time, welcome to the podcast. Hopefully, you're going to get some really good stuff out of this. If you're returning, thanks for your support. And for those of you who are viewing, you will see that we have a guest with us today. We have Carlee Wolfe with us. How are you doing today, Carlee?
I'm doing really, really well. I'm excited to be here with both of you. And I
Excellent.
was trying to think, you mentioned like partners in crime, not causing crime, but I don't know, pushing the limits always, stretching.
Yeah,
I want
absolutely.
to be a partner in crime. Can there be a three? That's what we're doing today.
So, take a couple moments and tell our audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the topic.
Yeah, perfect. So, I currently work at Hyatt Hotels. I lead our leadership development and organizational effectiveness group. I've spent my career in learning and organizational development, serving in different capacities, for profit, nonprofit. Have also done some consulting. So that's on the professional side. I also have a very strong passion for coaching and coaching volleyball, which includes all kinds of range of sport, but also more specifically, and we'll touch on this a little bit today, sitting volleyball, which is an adaptive sport. So if you think about Paralympics, this is the sport that kind of feels that space. So with that, I do some work in the community here in Baltimore, which is where I'm located. Great city. If you haven't been here, that'll be my first shout out for people to come check out Baltimore. But yeah, that's kind of a little bit about me.
Excellent. Awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, today's topic is build for the pivot. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? What your thoughts are on build for the pivot?
Yeah. Well, I think what is pivot? What is pivot? I think can feel overwhelming to a lot of folks or exciting to folks in other spaces. But building for the pivot for me is about having taking if we think about pivot as opportunity, how do we prepare for those with leading with curiosity, with kind of taking life or career in that like questioning space, like what's next, what's possible, what is that? And I think if we are leading with curiosity, that not only opens up possibilities, but we start to take in like information, experiences that not only create more possibilities down the road, in other words, the pivot, but also starts to kind of create baseline information, experiences, insights for us that when those pivots come up, even if they're small enough we don't even know it, we could be ready, and the door could be opened differently than we have before. And so for me, when we think about those pivots, it's all about like the curiosity, the courage to have that curiosity, and to take when you're in those moments to take it all in. I think I was talking to somebody earlier this week about how fast life moves. Sometimes we're just going day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. Um, and how do we kind of take that step back to allow for curiosity to create pivotal moments for pivoting? So I'd love to like kind of dive, explore also what those things mean. But out of the gate, when I think about preparing for the pivot, it's about that curiosity. It's about that courage to have the curiosity, the courage to walk through those pivotal moments, and to embrace the journey that comes with that allows us to walk through those pivotal moments.
Wow, well, Carl, you said a lot of things,
So
a lot of
much.
things me and Dave talk about in different phases of our podcast. I mean, we've touched on just about everything you talked about, but I like the way you phrased it, build for the pivot, because I think the curiosity thing is the one that really sparks my interest, mainly because, and I've said this many times, many people that have seen our podcast or heard a podcast heard me say this many times about viewing things now kind of childlike, with that curiosity, with that you know wondering what this could be, where it could go, and still having those dreams like a kid, wanting to be the fireman or the superhero, having that curiosity. So
Yeah.
that's why, again, this sparks my interest, because that's why I think we view this thing. And when we first got on the call before we came on, the air, you touched on how me and Dave even met, that
Yeah.
curiosity
Yeah.
to get us to where we are today. And that's how it, manifested. It's just having those thoughts of what it could be. So I really like that approach to not knowing what you're really preparing for, but doing something that
Yes.
gets you to that next level. And again, me and Dave both have coached people to think about that, because we don't know what life is going to bring us,
Yeah.
and to really fight that complacency and not doing anything, but to always be doing something, not in attempt to just always be moving to the next thing, but being prepared to move to that next thing.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I also love that you just said it then there too, of just kind of the continual pursuit, curiosity, building on, is then the pivot, whether it's our pivot, like a pivot we've chosen, or a pivot
Yep.
that has been introduced to us.
Yep.
We've already sort of kind of like built that muscle or understanding or confidence to be able to enter through the door, number one. And number two, it might also kind of lower the bar of entry of what a pivot could be. Again, whether it's self-introduced, like, hey, I want to go get a new job,
Right.
or it's brought upon you, which is, I lost my job.
Yep.
And when we're always in that learning, engagement, growth mode, I think that that opens up even that kind of creates this like greater capacity for pivot
Mhm.
and curiosity even within the pivot. Um, And I think about, I mentioned, coaching volleyball, and specifically sitting volleyball. The athletes that are part of those programs come to the gym in many, many different ways. But some of the most inspiring athletes I've worked with are there because they had a major life pivot. Something had happened, car accident, something maybe in service in the military. And so maybe you've lost your leg or your arm or part of your hand, and what does that life pivot look like for you? Where are you going with what's been, with where you're at in your journey and where you'd like to go? And the most inspiring thing I see that is the resilience from those athletes is taking things like we're talking about, like learning, right? Maybe I play different sports. I'm just in general physically active. I have a mindset of growth. And so in that life pivot, it's about in their case, finding that gym, finding the volleyball gym that brought them to their next stage of their careers, and being open to learning a new sport, but building upon things that were once there. Again, the curiosity to what's next, what is possible. So just drawing on kind of maybe like a specific example, but I love what you said.
And I like what you said earlier about the courage. You've mentioned courage a few times since we've started the podcast. And I think courage is a big, big piece. Having the courage to just, you know, accept the pivot or take the pivot head on,
Yes.
and just embrace it, have the courage and just press forward and taking that step, like you mentioned, and having the just the mental clarity to realize where you are in that moment, and then that courage to just just leap into it, lean forward, lean into it, and take it head on, and take those first steps, whether it's a phone call, an email, doing research online, talking with a friend, reaching out to your personal or professional support system, just that courage is a big piece,
Yep.
to the curiosity, because you can be curious and you can have clarity, but the courage comes in taking action.
Mm-hmm. And I think courage could be a big word too, right? Like, where does that come from? Is always a question I like one personally think about it, but I think I see and hear other people exploring. Um, and so in these moments, I think a powerful question of what does courage look like for me in this pivot, if you will. And courage could be something as small or and big as taking that first step, is taking the first, I'm going to talk to somebody about it. I'm going to write it down. Um, I'm going to take that first class. I'm going to explore that first thing. But to the big point too, of, like let's just go maybe career pivot could be very scary for folks. That first step could be I'm going to write it down, which is I want a new job. And then the next step of, all right, I'm going to go learn about what's in market. I'm going to go network with folks. I'm going to put in my first application. But also think about the courage to take the either the literal or figuratively first step into your new career. You show up to your job, this new job that you've now been building up to, reminding yourself of the journey that you went through, reminding yourself that you're capable. So just giving some examples that I think courage can feel big, and I applaud people that take those courageous steps, no matter what they are. And if you're just beginning, like, what is that question? Asking yourself, what does courage look like for me in this moment? What do I need to fuel that courage to take those steps, whatever they may be?
Yeah, again, Carl, you touched on again some great things that me and Dave talk about a lot. The first thing is the small steps,
Yeah,
and again, it could be just as simple as like you said, writing it down, or for some people, it may just be taking a step out of bed.
yeah,
So it just really the other part of that you really touched on was actually them defining what courage or what success means to them, and it could be just as simple as that, writing it down that I want a new job. That could be the first step, the simplest step, but it is an accomplishment, it is a step forward. And that's again what we try and help people realize. It doesn't have to be this grand thing that you're trying to accomplish right off the bat.
yes,
And it's really thinking about, okay, what can I do? What's going to put me a step closer? What's going to move me forward? And I think when people start to view it that way, then it is a little bit easier to start to gain some momentum and start to be courageous, because you start to realize I am succeeding, I am
yes,
moving forward, I am progressing. And so I think those couple of things you just said again are just uh, and then thinking about the self-reflection as well.
yeah,
Again, just that defining what things could be, what it looks like, and just staying open to those possibilities.
yes. One thing that I love about where this conversation is, and I don't want to like overplay on the words, but I think it helps give us anchors that the clarity, courage, and curiosity. It's not one step followed by the other. It's not one or the other. We're starting to see the interplay of these things. And you just mentioned like having like getting out of bed, that courage to get out of bed. I also need that clarity, right? I needed to ask myself, like, what does courage look like today? Taking that step out of bed, and I'm going to make it happen. And so thanks for sharing that because I think for me it's helping articulate like that ecosystem of what can build you into the pivot.
Mhm.
You had mentioned when we were talking about build for the pivot, you had mentioned before we started the show that it's been the key to unlocking what is next, building for that pivot. Tell us a little bit about that piece. How building for the pivot is key to unlocking what is next.
Yeah, and I think building for that pivot, right? We are doing things every single day of our lives that are equipping us to make those pivot points. I mentioned like the ones that we choose or the ones that are put upon us. Um, But how are you, perhaps this is the question, like we're exploring it right now, preparing for that pivot. But I think it starts with that question, what does that look like for you? How are you exploring new things? How are you stepping outside in your community and engaging in different ways? How are you slowing down a little bit to reflect and take in things that have been going on in your day or in your life to this point. And I think all of those things, while could seem small, or maybe these are things that we already do, but I think that's what starts to build like these muscles around pivoting, right? We are curious, we are always growing, we're taking in new, because that's what I think a pivot is. It is a newness. It is something that we are moving into. Um, and are in a way open to, even if it's scary, or fully open to, and it's the best thing that we've ever done. But I think, Dave, that's the kind of like what we were talking, that's what we were exploring a little bit together, which is what are those experiences, learnings, moments that we're continually taking in that build those muscles that prepare us for those pivots. And for me, like I'll just draw on a personal example. I mentioned at the beginning, I do some work in the community. One of the places that I serve is Kennedy Krieger Institute, and they do a lot of work for children, research, rehab, education, with kids different needs. For example, a lot of like spinal cord injuries. And I started there supporting in the adaptive sports arena. I mentioned volleyball. This was a good entry point for me. Um, and and I started supporting other sports. So different sports, I go every couple of weekends, but then I started asking what else can I be doing? Like let's make some connections to some of their events that they're running. How can I be a voice and an advocate for what they're doing in education and in research? Because it's so important. Um, by the way, 1 in 5 Americans have a disability, right? And these are sort of like the speaking of conversation, this is where this sits. Why am I telling this story? I think for me, in reflecting in the past couple of years and how I've been engaged with that organization, it's been one big pivot after the other. It's been, Dave, you asked, like, what does preparing for the pivot look like? It's been for me my whole life exploring adaptive sports. Like, what else can I be learning? It's about understanding the power of community and rehab, because I've learned that through some personal experiences with connections with friends. And it's been taking in those moments and drawing upon them in my life to be curious, to be open, to be vulnerable, to go through the journey, whether it's with myself or connecting with others as they've had those stories, and then taking that in now this moment. So if I fast forward back to Kennedy Krieger, I don't think my engagement would be as involved if I wasn't curious. If I didn't like have those moments that I've been reflecting back and thinking, gosh, I have been doing adaptive sports with volleyball. I could be doing more in my community. Let me get into Kennedy Krieger. Um, I have a lot of people who are interested in sport and helping children. Okay, great. How can I get more people involved in those events? So I'm just drawing on that story to say it's not these like major things, but it's for me, just in this example, accumulation of life, of curiosity, of experiences, of connecting with others that now are creating these micro pivots, right? I'm pivoting into like a deeper engagement into my community. I'm pivoting from just doing sports to now also community engagement. So I don't know, hopefully that helps. Like I just trying to simplify like where we're taking when you asked me about curiosity and preparing for the pivot. I think it like this is life. I think it's the accumulation of and maybe the recognition of we all need to give ourselves more credit for the things that we're building day to day to allow, enable, and fuel these other really powerful moments that we could be that we are having and will continue to have.
Yeah,
No,
I
no,
think
again,
that good.
I was just going to say again, I think you're uh, singing the same song that me and Dave have talked or touched on these past 3 or 4 years. Just the
Yeah.
idea that everything you've done to this point has been part of your journey, has been part of your life, and it doesn't just go away. So why
No.
wouldn't you take the best of it, the lessons learned, and continue to apply those things forward? And that's really the way I just, vision, what you just said. Just taking all those things that you've learned, figure out what works, what doesn't. Me and Dave say this all the time. If we gave you a blueprint of our lives, to everything we did to get to where we are today, it wouldn't be the same for you, because it just
Absolutely.
so everything you just said, it again is what we talk about. It's just the idea that every experience that you have, everything that you've done can lead or pivot to something else. It can be applied somewhere else. I mean, even when you do learn, you may take a 5 hour course, but you may only take 5 minutes of it because that's what's going to be applicable to that next pivot. I mean, you
Yep.
may retain that thing, but the thing that you apply to that next thing may only be this piece of it. So I
Yes.
really like the way you said that. It's just that everything you've done can be applied to the future state, what if or what could be. And so yeah, everything you're saying resonates totally with me, and again, hopefully our audience can see some of these ties to some of the things we've been talking about in the past.
Yeah, and I was going to
Yeah.
say, be curious about that pivot, you know, because if you don't take any action, then the answer is no. So you've got a
Yeah.
50-50 chance of it working to your advantage. Why make it a 0% chance? And leaning into that pivot, being curious about it, I think that's kind of a change in mindset because most people fear a pivot. They fear
Yeah.
change, or they're uncomfortable with change, or they're uncomfortable about pivoting. What is it going to do to me? in my family or my circumstances. Instead of focusing on the positive, what's in it for me about this pivot? What can I gain from this pivot? And I think that's a perspective that will help a lot of people, because when you fear a pivot, don't fear the pivot. A little play on don't fear the reaper. Don't fear the pivot. Lead and be curious about the pivot.
I agree. I agree. And it's you can go back to the like age-old question of so a pivot literally for those who are watching, right? We can move to the right. We can always pivot back if we want.
Yeah.
But if I was a betting person, which I'm not, but if I was, I'd put all my money on take the pivot, and I bet you wouldn't pivot back because I think that starts to go into the journey, right? You are also going to learn something new in that pivot that the return to what was, I just don't think it will be the same type of energy and space that you think you're departing from. And so maybe it's a pivot on a pivot, right? We go somewhere, we learn. Maybe it wasn't the thing that we had imagined, but where do we want to go next? It's likely not going to go back because
Yeah.
now we have gained something in that pivot, which I think is extremely powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like you learn. Sorry, Dave, but it's like you learn something, and once
You
you
did.
see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I kind of liken this too. Is that once,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, you don't want to go back. You're like, okay, I tasted this, I like this, I want to continue to move forward. So, well, it's very difficult to go back and say, okay, I've seen this, but I'm going to close my eyes to it.
Yeah.
So that's
Or unfeel it, right? Or
right.
unhear
Yep.
it, right? Like
Yep.
there's all these like
yeah.
connected senses that go with newness.
Yep.
And we know that. We know that in our being, which by the way, I
That,
think is super cool. And
yeah,
part of what the pivot is.
it
Sorry, Dave.
yeah, no, it's okay. It reminds me of, when I got out of the military several years ago, many years ago, I was thinking, wow, I missed the military. But to that point, the military that I miss is is so far, it's so different now. Even 6 months later, the military had already become different from when it was I was in.
Right.
Same with a job. Going back to a company, you're like, oh, I really missed that company or missed that relationship. You're out of that position, you're out of that relationship for a reason. And if you go back to it, it's going to be different, to your point, because you've already experienced things, whether it's been hours, days, weeks,
Yeah.
months, or years, that have affected your perspective and who you are today. And going backwards, it usually, I mean, for some people it works out, but it's going to be different regardless.
Yep. 100%. Well, and this was where I think curiosity plays another role, right? Because here we go. I'd be curious if in that journey, like when the things that you miss, I think maybe the question could be like, what at the core of it do you miss, or did you miss about that chapter? And I'm just gonna maybe draw an example that I would assume to be there, and you can keep me honest. I would assume part of it's like connection. You very strong mission. You're connected with other people in that mission. So then the curiosity might take you to like, well, where else can I get that? And then maybe I'm curious because I know my friend Joe found this really cool company where he feels very connected. Joe, tell me about that company. I'm curious about what makes it special, what got you there. Curious if you know if there are other places like that. Curious if you know if there's other people I could talk with that also share in this. Right? I think there's a web of curiosity that starts to open up possibilities that go back to what started as your first curious question. What was I missing? What am I missing? And can that serve me in other ways in this new chapter in my life, or this pivot that I've made? So I do think that's also important. I think in pivots, right, we are moving to something. That doesn't mean everything around will be perfect. And so part of that, also the curiosity is exploring like what else is missing? What else do I want to do? And know to have that clarity about what it is that you're seeking, and then be curious about how to learn about it, which gives you the clarity to kind of continue to move.
I think that's very important the way you just stated that a lot of us like Dave, I had some of the same challenges when I retired 5 years ago from the military. Same thing. I mean, the first 6 months, probably first year, I was really struggling with like Dave said, trying to find what I've missed about that. How am I going to gain that?
Yeah.
How am I going to regain that? How am I going to do that? And so I think that is that's a very good um, approach we should take to really understanding what was it that we missed about it. What are those things that made us happy? What are those things that we could duplicate somewhere else possibly? And I think that's what I struggle with. When I got out of there, I was like, okay, so now what do I do with this?
Yeah.
I'm used to this for so many years. How do I get that back? And so that's what I think I struggle with, trying to maintain that when
Yeah.
that part of my life was gone. So I think that's why it took me so long to figure that out. And then once I figured it out, I started to see how I could apply it in different ways. And that's when things started to change for me, was just understanding, okay, I'm not going to get that, but this is why it was so important to me. This is the things I can continue to do because of that situation. So for
Yeah.
me, that's the way it helped me, was to understand what was I missing? How can I reapply it to something else?
So what I
Yeah.
just heard, Joe, was that you embraced the pivot.
So many
Right.
pivots.
Yeah.
You
Yep.
embraced the pivot.
Yep.
Well, and I was going to ask, how many pivots do you think you took to even find that? Because as you were sharing, I was hearing you and seeing you, and there's a journey in yourself with that. I can like feel
Yeah.
it, and so I'd be curious, like how many pivots do you think you took to even to get to that stage where you just said, which is I eventually found it.
Well, it did take like, so for one of the things, when I was still in the military, because I was in the Air Guard, so I was, had a full-time job, then I had this other commitment. At that same time, I was teaching. I was doing a lot of different things, and so I actually stopped doing most of that. Once the military was gone, I stopped teaching for a period of time, kind of took a hiatus, just so I could figure those things out. I didn't want anything to clutter my mind, and so then it became, more clear, because I didn't have all
Mm,
those distractors. I didn't have
yeah,
all those things that I had to commitments to. And once I was able to do that, kind of clear my plate, then I could take a really good look at what I wanted to accomplish, what I wanted to do, and that's what made it help me to get to where I needed to be. What was just clearing some of the clutter out of my head,
yeah.
and then so then I was able to make that honest, you know, be honest with myself and say, hey, that no longer exists. Now, what do you need to do? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what it was for me, just to clear the clutter from my life and everything. And that was definitely very helpful.
Mm. I love that. And one of the things I'm thinking about just is sometimes in seeking clarity, we need to be curious why we don't have clarity. What I just heard you say is you had a lot of things going on that were a distraction for that clarity you needed to kind of clear. So just adding in one piece that I was inspired by.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've got about 2 minutes left.
Oh, so fast.
Yeah, so fast.
That's very fast.
So Carlee, what would you like to leave our viewers and listeners with? What are a few things that you can give them that they can take away and actually use in their personal, professional, and career development?
Yeah, I think one thing like one big question is as folks are sitting there or driving or walking, maybe just taking away kind of these three words that we've been kind of working around: clarity, courage, and curiosity. And maybe just starting with those questions. Like, what do I seek clarity on? Where can I be more courageous? And where do I want to be more curious? And kind of leading the conversation, like see where that goes for you. But I also think taking these words and using them as you are on the journey to make a pivot, considering a pivot has occurred to you. How can you be curious? How can you build upon your courage? And how can you move forward with clarity? And without overusing the words, I think it's just drawing upon your your life experiences to continue to fuel where you're going. And I think when you feel stuck, just remembering it just begins with a question. And I think that if I were to put folks in a place, if they were out joining your podcast, what would they want to share about their pivots and the things that they learned in making that happen? And it's all around us. So I'll leave folks with questions. but I really, really appreciate the time to be able to talk about, I think, this very, very important topic because it's we're in a world of pivots right now. Lots of stuff happening in work, in the world, and in our lives. And I have hope for all of us. We continue to have the courage to make the pivots that we want. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Joe, what are your final thoughts?
Well, again, I just want to thank Carlee for bringing this topic to us and sharing her perspective on this topic because it is a lot of things that we talk about, but I just like the way she framed it and the curiosity. Um, that to me is really what stands out. Again, just people understanding and she said that things are changing in our lives every day, and some are forced upon us, some are, things we want to do, but really looking at asking those questions. How do I get there? And then reflecting on your past, because if some of the questions you can answer yourself. If you say, well, I don't know if I can do this, but you think back, well, I was able to achieve
Yeah.
this. This is very similar. Why wouldn't I be able to do this? So I think you highlighted a lot of things that could be helpful for people because we are in a constant flux of pivoting and changing. So to be prepared for that and to understand how we've already accomplished and being able to apply that to our next pivot. So again, thanks for being on the podcast and sharing your perspective on building for the pivot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'll say too, if folks want to engage, happy to continue the conversation. I love to connect with folks on LinkedIn. So I love stories, and I hope people are excited about their story too.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really what we try to do is listen to other people's stories because that's how we
Yeah.
learn.
Yeah.
That's where you glean those beautiful moments that's like, oh, I can do this too. So
Yes.
with that, we'd like to thank our viewers and listeners for joining us on another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, your personal, professional, and career development podcast. If you want to reach out to Carlee, um, her contact information will be in the description. Thank you, Carlee, for joining us. And until next time, we want you to continue being your not so ordinary you.
Yeah.